be important for you. If you don't already have a resume, we'll talk about how to create one using some best practices and some advice, and how to cater your resume specifically to different actuarial positions that you might be applying for. A lot of this session, I am going to be talking to you. I would love to not have to talk the entire time. So there'll be some times where I'll open it up for questions, for comments. So if you have any questions as we go through, please raise your hand on Zoom. I'll call on you. We can answer anything as we go through. We'll also have some time at the end of our call today to answer any other questions that come up throughout tonight's session. But I want to start with some of that interactive conversation and in introducing myself. And so you kind of know where I'm coming from today. I want to talk to you about my background because I am not an actuary. That is not my area of expertise. I'm actually coming to you from more of the academic advising, admissions, recruiting side of things. So a little bit about myself. I joined Liberty about a year and a half ago after having spent close to 12 years working in higher education. So I went to college, graduated with a degree in finance and communications, and ended up doing radio advertising sales for a radio station here in Boston, where I live. Quickly realized that that wasn't what I wanted to do. So I pivoted to higher ed, and I spent 12 years working in four-year colleges and at a community college near my home, where I was working with college students to figure out what their goals were, what their aspirations are for a career, and what they need to do to get there. Point of that is your resume is kind of central to all of that. And that's what my expertise is. I am not, again, an actuary, but I work really closely with our actuarial partners here at Liberty. So I'm very happy to be sharing some of my knowledge and some of the things that I've picked up on in the last year and a half working with our actuarial programs here at Liberty to share some of that knowledge with you all tonight. So to start, what is a resume? A resume is really your first way and your first opportunity to make an impression with an employer or with a recruiter. It is a document that outlines all of the achievements that you have, your skill sets, what responsibilities you've had in different roles, whether it's professional, if it's academic, if it's extracurricular on campus, and what your education is. A resume is also concise. It's specific, and when you're thinking about it from the recruiter or the hiring manager's perspective, you want to make sure that it's easy for them to read. So that means not a lot of text. If you have bullet points, you're not putting down paragraphs and paragraphs for each bullet point, but it's really easy for someone to quickly look at and get a sense of what your skill sets, your achievements have been. Your resume should also be catered to each unique position that you're applying to. So if you're applying to a role as an actuarial intern, your resume is going to look very different than someone who might be in the same classes as you or in the same boot camp here, but is applying to an underwriting role, or you might be applying to something completely outside of the field of actuarial science. That resume, even though you might have the same skill sets and the same backgrounds, is going to look a little bit different based on the job that you're applying to. So we want to make sure we cover some of that today, and you leave today's session with that better understanding about how to best cater your resume to each role that you might be applying to. So we know from a very high level what a resume is, but what is a resume not? What's not a resume? It's not your transcript. That's a completely separate thing. It's also not a job description. I talked about this on that last slide. A resume should not be difficult to read, and a resume is not generic. Again, your resume should be specific to each role or each job position that you're applying to. You don't want to be using the same resume regardless of what you might be applying to, whether it's, again, a role in actuary, it could be a role in an insurance company, it could be a role within a consulting firm. Again, the resume is going to look different. You don't want to have that generic resume for every opportunity that you apply to. It's also really important to highlight details on your resume. So we talked a little bit about this again, but your resume is really that first opportunity to market yourself and to make a first impression with an employer. It is an opportunity for you to brag about yourself, all of your skill sets, all the opportunities that you've been able to take advantage of. That is your opportunity to highlight what a great candidate you are and why a company or why an employer should be bringing you in for an interview and end up offering you a position at that company. Your resume is that catalog of all the experiences and successes that you've had, again, specific to the role that you're applying to. And it is really that first opportunity for you to get a foot into a door of the company that you're aspiring to work for. So I talked a little bit about this in my background, but I am a recruiter here at Liberty Mutual. So how do folks like myself look at resumes? I wish I could tell you that I spend 15, 20 minutes on every single resume, but because of the sheer number of applications we get every day and every week, we just don't have the capacity to spend that much time. So what we do as recruiters oftentimes is, as an initial overview of your resume, we're looking for high level details. We're looking for keywords that might be important to the role. It could be technical skills that would be required for a specific position that we're looking to see if someone has. And we're looking at your experiences. This is also an opportunity for you on your resume to have us be able to assess the highlights that you want us to pay attention to. So this is what you think is most important, whether it's academic projects that you've participated in, awards you may have received, what your education is itself, your degree, your school, your GPA. These are all things that recruiters are going to be looking for at that initial level. When we feel like the candidate that we're reviewing looks like a good fit, we think that they match a lot of what we're looking for in that position, those resumes that we feel are the strongest are going to be those resumes that we prioritize between recruiters and hiring managers. So those resumes that are the strongest are the ones that we will typically reach out to first to schedule interviews. Those top tier resumes, the ones that make the best first impression, are those that go at the top of the pile, basically, for consideration. So now that we've talked about what a resume is and why it's important to have it, what sections should be included on your resume? And I will caveat this is this, what we're going to go over now is really ideally for someone who is in college currently or a recent college graduate. We also do see, at least at Liberty Mutual for our rotational program and even for our internship, we do tend to see a lot of career changers as well. Everything that I'm going to go over here may not be applicable for a career changer, but there are going to be a lot of overlapping things that you'll want to include on your resume, whether you're a current college student, if you're a recent college graduate, or if you've been in the professional workforce for an extended period of time, but you're making that career change to pursue an actuarial opportunity. So in no particular order, here are some sections that you should include on your resume. First thing is your education. It's helpful for us as recruiters to know the school that you go to, what your major is, if you have a GPA that you want to highlight, and also what your graduation date is. That graduation date can be very important, especially if you're applying to a full-time program or if you're applying to an internship. Sometimes there might be cutoffs for when an intern candidate can be considered based on their graduation date. And if their graduation date is earlier than that initial cutoff, that candidate may be better suited for a full-time rotational program. But we as recruiters wouldn't really know that unless you include your graduation date. So if you are currently in school, definitely make sure you include that expected graduation date. If you have a GPA that you are really proud of, so really like a 3.0 or higher, or B average or better, include that cumulative GPA on your resume. If your cumulative GPA isn't at that 3.0 mark, then leave it off. Or if you have a major specific GPA, so let's say your overall GPA is 2.5, but that's because you had to take a lot of gen ed courses and all those history classes weren't your favorite subjects, so you didn't do as well as you've been doing in your core math courses, for example. That's an opportunity for you to be able to include your major GPA, especially if it is over that 3.0 threshold. And again, I don't want you to feel like you have to include your GPA, but if you feel that your GPA is a good representation of your skills and your ability as a student, definitely consider including that on your resume. It's also really helpful to include any volunteer or work experience that you have, especially as a current college student who might be applying for an internship. You might not have as much work experience to list or to highlight on your resume as someone who might be graduating college and they've had 1 or 2 internships at that date, or a recent college grad, or someone who might be a career changer. Just they've had more opportunity to gain that experience. So their resume may have more work experience that's listed. If that's not you, then that's okay. You can still include things on your resume to highlight the experiences and those activities, those opportunities that you have been able to take advantage of. So some of those can include involvement in student groups on your campus. You might be part of Gamma Iota Sigma, or your school might have an actuarial science club that you want to list because that's relevant to applying as an actuarial intern. Those opportunities, especially if you've had opportunities within those student orgs on your college campus to have a leadership role, whether it's chairing a committee, if you've served as like a treasurer or secretary or vice president, highlight that. That is a great opportunity to show that you have taken advantage of those opportunities that have been presented to you. Not every student will take advantage of those and seek those leadership roles. That is a differentiator for you to be able to include on your resume. And those are the types of things that stand out when recruiters are reviewing your resume. It's also really helpful to include professional associations that you're involved with. We are here at the IABA bootcamp session tonight. Include that you're a member and that you're active with IABA. That's a great opportunity to show, again, that you are demonstrating you have a vested interest and a desire to pursue an actuarial career. We might have someone who is part of IABA's programs that doesn't list that on their resume, and someone else that does. You might have the exact same experiences, but that person who lists involvement with organizations like this one, that might help tip the scales in their favor to get that interview. So if you have that opportunity to highlight your involvement in this organization, definitely take advantage of that. Especially with the increasing importance of a lot of technical skills in the actuarial field. If you have some of those, definitely important and oftentimes very important to list those on your resume. A lot of our roles here at Liberty are heavily focused on leveraging some technical skills. Virtually every actuary at Liberty uses Excel to some extent. If you have that knowledge of Excel, list that on your resume. If you have programming experience, so you might know Python, you might know R, you might have experience using SQL. These are things that professional actuaries at insurance companies, at consulting firms are using every day. And if you can highlight that you already have that background, you have that knowledge and skill, even before you start in that role, that might help the hiring manager feel more at ease with hiring a certain person, knowing that they don't have to do as much training to begin, because that hire, that intern can really hit the ground running because they already have that established knowledge of how to use some of those tools. Also, any awards or recognition that you've earned. If you've been named to the Dean's List at your school, if you were in the honors program, if you've received recognition from the company that you currently work for. Again, these are opportunities to highlight on your resume because they will help you differentiate yourself from other applicants. The last square that I'm going to pop up next should be fairly obvious for everyone here because it is really the core part of your career trajectory as an actuary, and that's your exams. If you have exams that you've passed, these, and we'll cover this in a couple different slides from now, that should really be near the top of your resume. A lot of you, though, here tonight might still be freshman, sophomore, junior year in college, and you might not have taken any exams yet. If that's the case, then it's also an opportunity for you on your resume to highlight any current plans that you have to sit for an exam. So even if you haven't passed an exam yet, if you have a plan, let's say right now it's May 2023, if you have a plan or a goal to sit for exam P in September or October of this year, even though that is months from now, it's still an opportunity for you to list that on your resume because that's going to be a signal to, especially an actuarial recruiter or a hiring manager, that you have that understanding of what the career path as an actuary is, what steps you will need to take, and you've already started that process. When we think about having a resume, It's also something to think about having two different types of resumes. So the way that I do this myself, and that I encourage students that I meet with at all sorts of different colleges across the country when we go to different career fairs and host events, is having a primary resume and a role specific resume. So I talked a little bit earlier about the importance of having your resume not being generic. It should be customed to every role that you apply to. That can seem like a daunting challenge, having to create a brand new resume every single time. Using this strategy helps make that just a little bit easier. So when we think about having a primary resume, this is essentially your library of all of your lived experiences, your achievements, the roles that you've had, a complete list of everything you have done up to that point. My primary resume, I've been a working professional now for close to 15 years. If I were to look at my primary resume, it's probably at this point 3, 4, 5 pages long. I'm not going to send that to a company or to a recruiter as part of a job application because I know that they're not going to read all 5 pages. But also, a lot of what I have done in the past may not be relevant for the role that I'm applying to. So that's where this role specific resume comes into play. When you customize your resume for the role, the job that you're applying to, what you can do is use that primary resume essentially as a database, and you can pull certain bullet points or roles or achievements from that primary resume into this custom role specific resume that you're putting together. So it's still going to be a little bit of extra effort, but you're not having to create this from scratch. You've already done all that hard work in creating the primary resume. At this point, you're just pulling out those bullet points and those things that you think are most relevant to the position that you're applying to. And again, it's important that you focus on those relevant skills and qualifications. Again, if you are working as a math tutor at your school, or if you're a TA, that's relevant to a mathematical role like an actuary. If you were an RA, again, that might not be a direct match to what you would do as an RA or as an actuary, but the role of a resident assistant on your college campus is heavily focused on networking, on team building, working in groups, creating presentations, navigating difficult situations and kind of negotiating. All these things are going to be important for various roles. So even if it doesn't on paper look like it might be a good fit, really take the time to think about what you did in that role and how you might be able to highlight certain aspects of your duties or your accomplishments that can be tailored or fit in to that position. Again, this role specific resume is unique to every company. It might be an opportunity if you have an intern specific resume, as an example. If you're applying to all property and casualty insurance companies like Liberty, you might be able to use the same resume because you've already customized it to be a P&C intern resume. If you're applying to a consulting firm, however, that resume might look a little bit different. So when you have the ability to make that resume as unique as possible, that is a great way for you to be able to help differentiate yourself and show the recruiter that you have taken the time to really understand the company and the role itself. And the last bullet point here, show, don't tell. It's great if you can say that you did X, Y, or Z, but if you have numbers that you can attach to that, that's going to make that bullet point even stronger. So you may have worked or been a part of Gamma Iota Sigma on your college campus, as an example. Let's say part of your role on a committee was to put together an event. You might see that 2 years ago or a year before, there was a similar event and you knew that 10 students attended. But this year you hosted it and you had 15 students. There's a 50% increase in attendance. That's a percentage, that numerical value that you can attach to that bullet point is going to help strengthen your resume. So it might not be something you can do for every single role or every single bullet point, but when you have the ability to do so, please try and quantify it. It's going to help strengthen your resume. So does anybody have any questions from what we've covered up through this point? Brenda, yeah, go ahead.
Hi. Yes, so I have a couple of questions. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, so my first question goes to what you were saying about, I guess, the different sections of your resume. So how can do you suggest we have a separate section for each, for education, for student involvement, awards and recognition? Do you recommend a separate section for each one of those?
If that works for you, then absolutely. As we get closer to the end of the presentation, I have like a sample resume that I can show everyone. And I also have a handout that I've given to Morgan. So she should be distributing that after tonight, that you can use as like a worksheet as you kind of create this. But a lot of these here that you might have, like your education, your GPA, professional associations, technical skills, that is probably 9 times out of 10 going to be the same on every resume that you create or that you send out. What's going to be different is more of that volunteer work experience or like that student group involvement, again, to highlight things that might be more relevant to the role that you're applying to. So you might have, again, for these different sections, the same thing for every resume, but you might have for that volunteer work experience, 4, 5, 6 different things on your primary resume that you're pulling from. Same thing with the student group involvement.
Okay. All right. I have 2 other questions. The other question is, I'm a career changer. So how far back should my resume go? And I'll guess tie in the other question. How far back? And then if you're saying that it should be specific to the job, how do you account for any potential gaps that may show up for roles that are not relative to the position you're applying for?
That's a great question. So I don't think there's a one size fits all answer to that because it really is dependent on someone's professional background. So I don't know what your prior career was before deciding to pursue actuary, but let's say
Underwriting.
okay, so you've got experience in the insurance space. That is what you want to be highlighting on your resume. Someone who may have been a math teacher in the past, the skills that they're or the experiences that they're going to highlight are going to be highlighting more of that mathematical skill set, where your background might be some of that, but it also might be more heavily weighted in understanding insurance as a whole and kind of how the inner workings work and how underwriters might work with actuaries in an insurance field. So a good rule of thumb that I tend to recommend is if you have a significant amount of work experience, really the last like 10 years or so is a good time frame to include on your resume. If there is anything that's beyond that that you feel really strongly is relevant to that role, then you can add that, but you really shouldn't be going back anything more really than 10 years if it's not relevant to the role that you're applying to.
Okay, and I'm sorry for the gap. How would you account for that? Maybe I missed it.
So the gap, honestly, at this point is not as much of a red flag as it has been in the past, given what happened the last few years with COVID, with a lot of like the layoffs that you might be seeing in the news, especially in the tech space. For our perspective, and I'm speaking, as a recruiter myself, and so I'm only speaking from my experience, I wouldn't put a gap on a resume as a red flag from someone because they may have had to take care of a sick family member, or they may have had an opportunity to return to school or to upskill. Like these are the types of things that would really be more discussed and kind of highlighted in an interview versus a resume.
Okay.
It's a great question, so. Emmanuel, I see you have your hand raised as well.
Yeah, hello, sir. Good evening, please. My question is, as a student, do you suggest the resume should be like a one-page resume? A student who wants to intern with companies like Liberty, do you suggest the resume should be a one-page?
Yeah, and I don't know. I know that we got the slide deck sent out in advance, so I don't know if you peeked and you looked ahead of what I'm going to be talking about, but I will cover that. But yes, you were right on. It should be ideally a page.
Okay, so also, do you think a LinkedIn profile can be used in place of the resume? Like,
not in place of the resume. You should have your LinkedIn, the link itself, hyperlinked on your resume in your like your contact section. But your LinkedIn should look similar to what is on your resume.
Okay, thank you. I will Lastly, I had a resume. Sometimes, like maybe if someone is applying to a job in education, like maybe the person wants to tutor like a school, tutor in a school like a professor, the resume should be like should be more than someone who wants to like intern with companies. Like, yeah. So that was some information I had. I just want to confirm whether it's true.
No, I would agree with that. And again, this is where the resume that you have is specific to the role that you're applying for. So if you're applying to an academic focused role, especially if you're looking to pursue like a master's or a PhD program, that resume is probably going to be more geared towards like presentations, publications that you may have done, research projects versus, potentially things that you would have as an intern candidate, highlighting more of your academic projects that you've completed or involvement in school organizations or previous internships that you've had. Again, the resume itself is going to look different because of the role that you're applying to. But if you're looking at those educational roles, what you mentioned, I would agree with.
Okay, gotcha.
And it looks like Angel, you have your hand raised.
Before asking my question, I just want to know, are you going to talk about the cover letter?
I am not covering the cover letter in this overview. I will say for Liberty specifically, and I can't speak to other organizations, Liberty does not require cover letters. So if someone submits a cover letter, we will review it for like additional context, but it's not required for, at least for Liberty Mutual. Other companies might require cover letters. So again, I can just speak for Liberty.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kevin, you have a question.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for doing this. I was just wondering, is it relevant to point out the fact that you were like a student athlete?
Absolutely. I mean, that's leadership 101 right there. So even if you weren't a captain on your team, the fact that you were able to work in a team environment and be a part of, whether it's NCAA team or if it's just like a club sport, that shows active involvement, especially knowing the fact that there's a lot of personalities that might be in a team and having to navigate some of that. Definitely include that on your resume.
And what section do you think you should be?
So that would be more so of like the on-campus involvement. So like the student groups involvement that you've had on campus or those activities.
All right, thank you.
It's a great question. So everything that we've talked about up to this point is really putting together all these puzzle pieces of who you are and what you've done. So really think of your resume as, especially if you think of taking that primary resume and pulling bits and pieces out to create your role specific resume, that's you putting the puzzle pieces together for that specific role that you're applying to. It's also really helpful to know your strengths and what you bring to the table. So when I think about strengths, I think about them in these kind of 4 quadrants. So your skills, your abilities, your knowledge, and everything else that you have that defines who you are. So if we think about your skills and thinking about this from an actuarial role mindset, this is your opportunity on your resume, and especially in the bullet points that you have on your resume, to really be more specific about the accomplishments that you've had, the roles that you've had, highlighting your ability to think critically and think strategically. Again, we talked about some of those technical skills. If you have experience using Excel, SAS, SQL, Power BI for data visualization, highlighting that as a skill in your resume. Also, if you have experience with project management or communication, and again, to your point, Kevin, about being a student athlete, communication, that is a vital part of being part of a team. So being able to highlight that, that's a skill that you're able to pull out of that experience. When we think about knowledge, what knowledge do you have about different policies and procedures? So Brenda, to your example, you've worked as an underwriter in the past, you know insurance policies, you know procedure. That is an opportunity to highlight your industry knowledge on your resume. You also, I'm sure, know a lot of insurance metrics. That might not be the case for everyone in this room tonight. But if you know what a loss triangle is, or if you know what a combined ratio is, or what frequency and severity mean. These are all, at least for the property and casualty insurance side of things, these are all things and terms that actuaries deal with on a daily basis. So again, if you can highlight that you already have that knowledge even before you start in the role, that might help give you a leg up when you're applying to these positions. Other characteristics could include your work ethic, your engaging presentations, if you are really comfortable in front of other people delivering these types of presentations like we're doing tonight, or if you have done some research, you've put together some dashboards and you're talking through, potentially a really complicated technical background or situation to someone who might not have that technical experience, that's going to be helpful for you to highlight on your resume. Are you decisive? Are you a people person? These are all things that define who you are that you can highlight in different ways on your resume. Also, what abilities do you have? Are you really good at mentoring? Are you good at coaching and developing people? Are you really good at building relationships or leading teams? These are things that you can have from work experiences, academic projects that you might be partnered up with someone else in the class on. If you've been a part of a student organization, or if you've worked in the field for a certain number of years, you have had opportunities to do these, highlight them as an ability on your resume. So a lot of this we've talked about is really kind of the legwork to go into putting together your resume. So once you feel like you have a good sense of your background, your abilities, the experiences that you've had, it's time to put pen to paper and to start putting together your resume. So if you don't have a resume created yet, or let's say you have one, but you want to make changes to it, the first thing you want to do when you're getting ready to customize your resume for a specific role, or to create that primary resume for the first time, look at the position that you're applying to. Look at the job description and see if you can pull out different qualifications that they may be looking for, different skill sets, different technical abilities. And we'll have a little activity to do in a little bit that will help with that. But think about how your academic program at your school or your previous experiences and your skills will align with that target role. Look at your responsibilities, what projects you've been involved with, and highlight those items, again, that fit with your target job's requirements. And lastly, identify those transferable skills that make sense for the position that you're applying to. Think about what you do well and what, again, those results were. If you can quantify things on your resume, again, I can talk about that until I'm blue in the face. That is super, super important. And even as an intern candidate, if you have the ability to highlight numerical wins that you've had on your resume, that's a great thing to do. So I have on this next slide, and this is what I'm going to send out, or I'll have Morgan send out afterwards in the handout. But we have an example resume and some buzzwords that you can think about using. So you have this resume here on the left-hand side. So you can see the name, the contact information is at the forefront. So the resume that you have here, this is an example of a student resume. So let's think about this as an intern specific resume. Again, if you are a career changer, it's going to look a little bit different, but the core of this is still going to be fairly similar. So you'll see at the top, there's 2 addresses, especially if you are going to school somewhere different from where you permanently live, your home address. It's helpful to include both cities and states. You don't need to put your full city, state, zip code. That's really not required or a best practice anymore. But having the ability to highlight where you are currently based in school and also where you call home helps recruiters understand potentially your ability to work in different offices across the country, or if you would be able to work in, Boston, where Liberty Mutual is based, but you are going to school in Florida, that's an opportunity to highlight that you have some geographic mobility as well. The next section is your education, which we've talked a little bit about. So covering your major, your GPA, your graduation date or your expected graduation date. And then it jumps down into your experiences that we've had or that you've had. You have the ability to highlight your computer skills or those technical skills, and then additional activities that you may have been involved with. This resume, those activities are just a list because the experience that this person has had is more substantial. Let's say you're a freshman in college or you're a sophomore, that might be flipped because you may not have had necessarily the professional experience. So your activities section, your student involvement, your academic involvement, that might be the bigger section of your resume. And that is totally fine because that is highlighting your achievements to date. You'll see here on this resume that there's one thing that we have missing, and that's your exams. So you want to make sure that the exams, whether you have taken exams and passed them, or if you were planning to sit for an exam soon, that should be near the top of your resume. If you can include that either right before or right after your education section, again, near the very top of the fold, as they say, that's where you want to highlight your exam experience. We also have all these words here on the right-hand side. I am guilty of this myself. I tend to use the same word to start off a lot of my bullet points at the start, and sometimes they're not as strong as they could be. So let's say you did some type of class project. You had to perform an analysis. You'll see there in the bottom, the section for redundant words. Perform is considered to be a redundant word. It's not really a strong action verb. So what we've given you is some opportunities to think about how you can use different language in your resume to make that bullet point a little bit stronger. So instead of saying that you performed an analysis, maybe you conducted an analysis or some type of research. You executed something. Those are ways that you can highlight, again, the same role, the same responsibility, but you're changing the language just a little bit to make that a little bit stronger. We also have some words that you can use to show accomplishment, from achieved to redesigned to minimized to surpassed. You'll have all these items in a handout again after tonight's presentation. So if you want to go through this to later on try and beef up your resume and make it a little bit stronger at using some of these action verbs, please do. We also have another example of resume here, a fake resume for someone who works at Liberty Mutual. And you'll see the way that this is formatted. The company, or in this case, if it's a school and you are part of an organization on campus, that's listed there along with the position that you held at that company. On the right-hand side, you also have the location, the dates that you worked there, that you were involved in that organization. And then you have those bullet points of what you did. So again, if you can quantify what you did in those different roles, even better. And the importance of using those action verbs, again, we talked about that on the last slide. That's just going to help bring your resume to life and to make it a little bit stronger. Also, thinking about consistency. If you worked at a role or you were part of a student organization 2 years ago, you're not still there. So don't say that you are working towards or you are doing something. Say that you did this. Use the past tense. And when we think about some best practices for putting together your resume or really perfecting your resume, a good resume should be formatted and organized well. And Emmanuel, your question about length of the resume, a good resume should be no more than 1 page, especially if you are still in school. If you are someone who has significant work experience and you're a career changer like Brenda, your resume might be 2 pages. But really anything beyond 2 pages, I would personally recommend cutting that down so you're kind of keeping to that 1 to 2 page maximum. But your actuarial resume should be focused on your exam progress, your volunteer opportunities, involvement that you've had on campus, or any work experience that you've had to date. It should also be fairly consistent in terms of font size and font color. There are a lot of resume templates that are out there, especially on like Canva, or you might see on TikTok. And there's a lot of discussion about like resumes being able to be read by ATS systems or applicant tracking systems, and how if your resume isn't ATS compliant, it's going to be automatically rejected. Again, speaking specifically for Liberty Mutual, I will tell you that every single resume that someone submits for the programs that I recruit for, so our internship program and our rotational program, I review every single application, every single resume. So it is actually for my roles, it is me reviewing those. So if you do apply to Liberty Mutual at any point in the future, please rest assured that my eyes will be reviewing your resume personally. But it definitely helps when you're reviewing as many resumes as we do to have consistency for us to make it easier to read. If you have different colors, if you have different sized fonts or different styles, you might have a photo on your resume. Best practice, and I can't stress that enough, it might look nice, but that's not important to us as a recruiter. What's important to us is what you're bringing to the table and your experiences. So that is really where you want to pay more attention and more effort versus trying to make the resume look as pretty or as fancy as you can. Also, another best practice, if you see some of those resume templates where you might have like a percentage bar of your knowledge of Excel and it's 4 out of 5 stars. That's not helpful for us as recruiters because we don't know what 5 stars means. We don't know what 4 stars means. So if you have experience using Excel, you want to highlight that in the technical skills section, but also drop that into some of your bullet points. So if you were working in a class project and you used Excel to do some data manipulation, talk about that in your bullet point and then list that in your technical skills. It's also important, again, for consistency purposes to keep the font size, color the same margins all around your resume should be consistent, and then your tense. You don't want to be talking about something in the present tense and then change to the past tense and going back and forth throughout your resume. Pick it and use it. So my recommendation would be to use the past tense on your resume. You also want to proofread your resume as many times as you can because you can look over it 15 different times and not pick up on something, but you might have your roommate or your partner or your friend look at your resume and they can pick out things that you might have missed because you've been looking at this resume for so long and everything just blends together. Having a fresh set of eyes is super helpful. And it's also important to use those easy to understand bullet points. You want to stay away from listing paragraphs or just copying your job description onto your resume. You want to highlight what you were specifically able to achieve and what your responsibilities were. Emmanuel, I see you have your hand raised.
Oh, thank you very much. I wanted to find out, assuming you have a master's degree and then you want to stick to a one-page resume, is it fine if you just list the master's degree as your education and then leave out your undergrad?
If your undergraduate degree is relevant, I would still include that.
And then go over a page, or you put something else out?
Yeah, you can. Most of the time when I see that, it's still a page, but the way that the resume is formatted, the space that the education takes up is a little bit smaller. So you're potentially like moving the way you have it showing on your resume to still keep it to one page.
Thank you.
Nandisha, you have your hand raised?
Yes, hi, Brendan.
Hi.
Thank you for this great clear-cut presentation, very precise. Actually, I do have a question, given that you mentioned about including your permanent address. So for a student who is willing to relocate if they are being offered a full-time or any internship co-op position, will that not be a downside?
No, if you're open to relocation, you can list that on your resume.
Okay. All
So
right,
if you do have that flexibility, that is definitely something that you would want to highlight, because if you're applying to a company who is only hiring out of New York City, but you're based in Seattle, they may have a preference for looking at folks who are closer to New York City. But if you are able to show that you're open for relocation, then that's something you want to highlight.
Okay, I do have another question based on what you've just mentioned. Does Liberty Mutual sponsor students from out of US, like for example, based off Canada?
So for certain roles, Liberty does provide sponsorship. Not every company and not every role does. So if you if you are a candidate that's applying to, let's say, a role at a US company and you would require sponsorship, that is something that you definitely want to either list on your resume, or if you don't feel comfortable listing that on your resume, oftentimes there might be a question on the application that asks if you would require sponsorship. That's something you want to include because that can help guide the discussion with a recruiter when you're having those initial conversations or during an interview.
I see. Thank you very much for the information.
Absolutely. And Angel, I see your hand raised as well.
Yes, I saw that the two samples resume that you sent, they were giving sentences, like they were writing sentences. Do you recommend to write sentences or just write bullet points, like job, this, this?
So bullet points should still be complete sentences, but you don't want to have like 3 or 4 sentences for each bullet point, because at that point you have a paragraph. But to show your experiences, you do want to have a complete sentence as a bullet point.
Thank you. And I wanted to ask as well, what do you think about the section qualities? Because I know that a lot of us, we add this section's qualities. So what do you think about that section?
I would recommend not using that as a entire section of your resume, but if you can highlight those qualities within your bullet points, that's a better approach. So if like one of your qualities is communication, for example, having a bullet point that talks about how you were able to showcase that communication skill, or if you're good at team building, being able to show that in a bullet point, that is a better use of your resume than having a section specifically focused on your qualities.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we also, when we think about your resume, there's the objective statement or your professional summary. If you have a objective statement on your resume, it should be consistent with the position that you're applying to. We've talked about that. It should be specific to every role and not generic. So for example, if you are aspiring to go down the SOA path, then that should be what you have in your professional summary if you have one. If you're thinking of going more towards the CAS route, then that's what you want to have in your summary, your professional summary. Also, if you're looking at insurance versus consulting and you know that you're geared towards one path, that's something that you would want to include in your objective summary. However, if you don't think that is a value add, if you're getting to a point where like you're trying to fit everything onto one page and you're trying to figure out what you can cut, if that professional summary isn't doing you any favors and it really isn't adding any value to your resume, I would recommend omitting that. When we think about your experience, again, this is your opportunity to show as a student coming in as an intern or as a recent college grad to highlight how your previous internship experiences or your student involvement applies to the role. And again, avoiding using your job description as your resume, because that is generic. That's not specific to your experience and what you were able to accomplish, but it's also not necessarily specific to the role that you're applying to. In using your resume to highlight your track record of success, you want to quantify that experience as much as possible, include those awards and recognition that you've received. If you were an IABA scholarship recipient last year, put that on your resume. And obviously, we talked about this a couple of times, but list out those past exams and any upcoming dates that you have. So when we think about how to best write an effective bullet point, I took this from an actual job posting from Liberty Mutual for an actuarial role. So this is one of our experienced positions that we were hiring for. And what I'm going to have you all do is just take 1 or 2 minutes to look through this and talk about, come off of mute, what types of transferable skills do you think we would want to highlight on our resume based on what you see here as bullet points. So take a minute, review this, and when you have some ideas, I'll just tell you to start throwing them out there, and we'll see what we come up with.
So what's the exercise that we have to do? Just read that and then tell you what kind of transferable skills you need?
Exactly. So what types of skills would you want to be highlighting on your resume that would be relevant for this specific role, given what the job posting is looking for?
someone who has leadership.
Leadership,
and
okay.
knows- Yeah.
Also good communication.
Communication, leadership, what else do you see?
Technical skills?
Technical skills, okay.
Someone who is willing to learn and to advance in his things.
Discipline with continuing to pass actuarial exams.
Awesome.
Presentation skills.
Presentation skills. I think at this point, everything that I came up with, you all did too. So this is what I thought of when I was thinking about what we would be highlighting here. So someone mentioned technical skills. Right off the bat, you're looking at that third bullet point of being able to take complicated technical skills and how to talk about that to non-technical audiences. You're going to need to do actuarial research and complete complex reports and studies. You're going to need some technical skills. It doesn't necessarily require Python or R or SQL, but again, Excel at a minimum, being able to highlight that in your resume. Your analytical skills are part of this job description, as are your organizational skills, along with communication, which we hit on. Someone had mentioned, I think Jessica, you had mentioned your progress towards actuarial exams. Do you have a goal? And so for Liberty Mutual, we're a property and casualty insurer. So for our rotational program, for the 4.5-year program that we have, that actuarial development program, when the participants finish that program, they are completing that with either ACAS or FCAS designation. So do you have that goal? If so, that might be something you want to put on your resume. Or if you're looking at more of like the health and life side of things, you're thinking the SOA path, do you have that ultimate goal of being ASA or FSA? Put that on your resume. And then general business acumen, especially when it comes to the insurance industry. If you're needing to work with underwriters about pricing models, profitability, you're going to need to have some knowledge of insurance. So being able to highlight that on your resume is important. When we think about how you can write an effective bullet point, our recommendation would be to use Who logic. So what did you do? How did you do it? And what was the outcome? So let's say you are a team leader or you are president of an organization on your campus. A great example of how you can write an effective bullet point would be that you managed a team of 10 direct reports by using organization and time management that led to 90% of performance feedback satisfaction rates. If we think about this from an actuarial specific perspective, if you're applying to an actuarial internship, you might have worked as part of your experience in a previous role or in a project on campus, you completed a quarter end reserving analysis and you were able to use SQL and pivot tables to help you with that. That type of a bullet point is where you can, or how you can include some of those technical skills in the actual highlighting of your experience. You may have created a Power BI dashboard to assist the pricing team in identifying over $1 million in savings. That's an opportunity to not only highlight technical skills, but you're quantifying the work that you did and how that benefited, in this case, like the company that you are working for. So the last items that I want to just highlight are some red flags to avoid. So this is why it's important to have other people look at your resume, not just yourself. If you have friends, roommates, partners, if you're a career center on campus, you can use those resources that you have at your disposal to have a second set of eyes on your resume. They may find some of these red flags. So they may be able to help you look for typos or grammatical errors. They may see on their computer, let's say you're sending a Word document to them for your resume, it might show differently on their computer because they have a different operating system than you. If you have that objective statement, if it is inconsistent with the role that you're applying to, or if it's generic, then that's a red flag you want to avoid. Take that out. And when we think about the details on your resume, if it's vague, if it's repetitive, if it lacks that personal touch or relevancy to the role, those are things you want to look at updating and changing. So the one thing I did not mention, and I kind of just hinted at that, another best practice when you submit your resume, submit that as a PDF. Because if you submit it as a PDF, you know how it's going to look on the other person's side. If you send it as a Word document, unfortunately, I've seen this too many times where the Word document that we get has the comments included, and you can see what the person's professor said for this bullet point and why they should change it. Or they might be personal comments that their friend had left that they don't want the recruiter to see, but that's the way that it showed up when it came into our system. If you save it as a PDF, you avoid all those problems. So best practice when you submit your resume, use a PDF. So that is the last item that I wanted to cover with all of you tonight. But obviously we've kind of answered some questions as we've gone through tonight, but if there are any additional questions that anyone has, I want to be able to answer those before we wrap up. And Doris, I just
There's a
pulled up the
question
chat.
in the chat. Oh, sorry.
Doris, I just saw your chat question. So is it important to underline that you are able to work as a team? 100% yes. Even if you are working as an individual contributor at a company, or if you're working as an intern, you are going to be working as a member of a team or directly with people on a project probably every single day. So if you can highlight that skill set that you have, then that is 100% something you want to have on your resume. Emmanuel, you have a question?
Yes. My question is it you stated that the font color should be black, and I want to know, is it important that like maybe some of my major skills I highlight them in a different color, like maybe red, and my other font styles are in black?
My personal recommendation would be to keep everything black, but if there's something that you want to draw attention to, that could be an opportunity for you to like use the bold feature for that word. So that way it's still the same color. It's just drawing your attention to what you're looking to highlight versus having it show up as a different color.
Okay, so so you mean it should all should be in black, but if maybe I want to like maybe make it bold, then I use the
so like bold, italicized. If you feel strongly that you want to draw attention to certain things, then I would recommend using those versus changing the actual color.
Okay, thank you. So let's suppose maybe the actual color that I used, maybe I'm using LaTeX to write my resume, and based on my code, I decided to use a green color for all the resume, beginning of the resume to the end. I decided to use a green color to start my code, my resume. So if I don't use like maybe a black color in place, like is it necessary that I should use a black color, or I can, if I start with a green color, I should complete with that?
Have it be consistent. If you feel strongly that you want to use a green color, make sure it's not like neon green, because after looking at resumes for hours, that's not going to be good for us to look at just like physically. So just make sure it's easily viewable.
You said it's usually what's readable.
Yep. So if you're using green, for example, maybe use like a darker color green, like a forest green, and not using like a neon green color.
Okay. I get it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Rebecca, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah. So I want to know, is there a difference between a CV and a resume? Or let me say the primary resume that you talked about, is there a difference between that and your CV?
There is. So the CV is typically a little bit more of a robust document. So it might have a lot of more like educational items. So classes you've taken, things that you've done in like, let's say you've done presentations or you've done research items. Those are going to be typically things you'd see more on the CV. The CV is going to be more in line with that primary resume. The CV is not something you want to be submitting as your application to a role. If you do have a CV, you want to still use that as almost like your primary resume and be taking bits and pieces from that to put together your customized resume for that specific role.
Okay, so from your explanation, does it mean the CV is more tailored towards like educational roles?
That tends to be where you see the CV. Yeah.
Okay.
So like applying like someone who might be a PhD or master's student, they tend to have it's more common to see a CV in those types of roles versus someone who's applying directly for you know, an actuarial specific role as like an intern or as a entry level role.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
Emmanuel.
Thank you. Yeah, so I wanted to find out, so for the technical skills and then the softwares that you know, is it okay to, I kind of mostly struggle with which ones to put on my resume, because some of them you kind of have a basic knowledge about them, and then some you have very good command over them. So which kind of softwares or technical skills should you highlight on your resume?
That's where I would recommend looking at the job description, because some of them might specifically call out some of those roles. If you're applying to an entry level role, for example, it might not be as important that they see that you have advanced experience with like Python. But if you're applying to more of like a data science or like a modeling type of a role in the actuarial field, that might be where it's going to be more important to have a highlight of that technical ability. But when it comes to like your proficiency with that, that's where you can actually include that on your resume. So you could include like strongly, however you would want to phrase it. But if you have like beginner proficiency or advanced proficiency with some of those, you can actually indicate that on your resume itself. So if you want to list everything that you have proficiency with, you can do that, but you can call out what you feel more strongly using.
Okay, thank you.
Brenda.
Yes, I want to double check. I know that you said that you would be sending information to Morgan to send out a copy of like buzzwords. Did you also say sample resumes as well?
So that sample resume that I had on the slide, I have the full page of that, so it'll be a little bit easier to read.
Okay, all right,
Yep.
thank you.
Angel, do you have your hand raised?
Yes, you said that we can add like some certifications or like some awards. Do you think that having a certificate from the AMF, like as an agent, is something worth mentioning, since it's not really like it's in the insurance world, but it's not related to the actual field? Or is it worth mentioning in the CV?
If you have space for it, then I would list it. But again, if you're getting to a point where with everything else you have in your resume, you are trying to fit things in just to fit them, then that might be where it might not be as relevant for certain roles, or it might be something that you want to include and take something else out. But if you have the space for it on your resume and it's not going to feel like you're trying to squeeze something in just to squeeze it, then I would put that in.
Okay, thank you.
And Rebecca, do you have another question?
No, please. Sorry.
Okay. So I want to thank everyone. Oh, Nandisha, do you have a question?
Yes, I do have a question. So how would you suggest someone who has not decided yet if they want to be in PNC or live, but has experience in live, for example, go forward and convince a resume screener or a campus recruiter that they want to gain some experience and in PNC, and then based on that, they will get an idea if they want to stay in PNC or continue with live?
So I will tell you from my experience recruiting for our internship and even our rotational program, that is very common. We see interns looking at going back and forth to see what they want to do, so that way they have a better sense of, all right, now that I'm graduating, like I know the path that I want to take. That's a perfect example of how you can leverage the objective statement. And it doesn't have to be a paragraph. It could just be a sentence saying that you're an experienced like SOA track and you want to gain that experience in the CAS field to see where your interests lie. I didn't phrase that how you would want to write that on your resume, but you can take the time to kind of think about how you would want to highlight that. But that's a perfect example of, if you would have an objective statement, that's what you would want to use that for. So that way you call attention to that right away.
Okay, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Michael. Hi, it just sounds like you're a little far away from your mic. I don't know if anyone else can.
Is it okay now?
Yep, that's better.
Okay. I wanted to know whether the primary resume you shared with us will be sent to us directly into our mails, so that at least it will be the benchmark for us to look at, so that we prepare a standard resume.
Yep. So I sent Morgan that information, so she should be sharing that with everyone after. What I have in the sample is going to be that more role specific resume. So your primary resume is really going to be what is going to be in that handout, but just a lot bigger, because that, again, that primary resume is a list of everything that you've ever done. And so it's probably going to be more than one page from every experience and every opportunity that you've been able to take advantage of. But that one page resume that you'll see, that's going to be what you would typically see as more of that role specific resume, but you can use that as a framework to build out your primary resume.
Oh, okay. And I also wanted to know, do we get a free resume review after this session?
So Morgan asked if I'd be able to do that. I would be happy to schedule those. I don't know what that process will look like. So that's something that we can touch base with Morgan on. But she did ask me if I'd be willing, and I would be able to meet with anyone who would like to do a little bit more of like a one-on-one conversation after tonight.
Oh, okay, sure. Thank you for the information.
Absolutely. So thank you everyone for letting me join tonight. If you would like to stay in touch with me, feel free to add me as a connection on LinkedIn. I think I'm the only Brendan Stam that's on there. So feel free to reach out, connect. If you have any other questions, I know Morgan will be in touch with all of you for the next boot camp session as well. And just a couple things as a reminder that are coming up this month with IABA. So in a couple days on the 17th, we'll have module 8, and that'll be covering basic business etiquette. There's the virtual town hall meeting on the 24th, and then we'll go into module 9, which will be interviewing skills, coming up at the end of the month on the 31st. There's also a couple QR codes here that you can take a picture of with your phone. So if you have not already joined the student-centric eBlast, you can scan that to get on that. There's our LinkedIn and our eBlast QR codes, as well as our Instagram. And one final plug that I will give just specifically for Liberty Mutual. If you are graduating with your bachelor's degree in 2025 or 2026, we are holding our first ever virtual Future Actuaries Forum this summer on July 27th and July 28th. This is going to be over 2 days in the afternoon, so the afternoon of the 27th and on the 28th. It'll give you some more information about Life at Liberty, our actuarial programs, and there's also going to be a case competition that'll be involved as part of that event, as some prizes going out to our winning team as well. And those that attend will also be able to interview for a internship for 2024 as well. So if you are interested in learning more about the Future Actuaries Forum, I believe there was some information that went out in the most recent eBlast for that, but also feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn and I can give you some more information as well. But with that, thank you again, everyone, for your time tonight. It was a blast chatting with you about resumes, and looking forward to connecting with a lot more of you over the next few months.
Thank you so much, Brendan. This was a really informative hour. I'm sure everyone got a lot out of it, and I'm sure that they're going to go away and tweak those resumes and get them all ready to get some great jobs and internships. Everyone, Morgan will be following up with some links and some attachments for you, some information from tonight's meeting and for the upcoming meeting. So thank you very much for your time and have a great evening.
Do we have the animal of the day?
Do you have the what?
The animal of the day.
I didn't get that from her today. So no.
Okay, so she will send it by email?
Yeah, she'll do that. She'll follow up with the animal of the day.
Sure.
All righty, everyone. Have a good night.
Yeah, same applies to
Hi,
you.
everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Brendan.
My pleasure.
Thank you all. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.